Again, any that might be visiting, we are studying in 2 Corinthians chapter 9. You might, if you don't mind, you might turn there and follow along with us. 2 Corinthians chapter 9. Last week, we had a question raised, and I think I'm going to circle back and address it a little more in depth because of the nature of it. And really, it has always been important, but certainly in the times that we live in, these perilous times, it's really important that we watch how we walk. You know, Donnie just prayed that we would walk uprightly and walk in accordance with the truth, what it says. And a part of that, walking uprightly, involved this principle that Paul mentioned up in the 8th chapter when he detailed he was sending Titus. He was also sending a brother whose praise was in the gospel, was throughout all the churches, and a brother that had been picked by the churches to travel with him. And the reason that this brother is traveling with Paul is to make sure that there is no appearance of impropriety. Now think about how important that is. The churches, an approved apostle, not a false apostle, the Holy Spirit took pains here to make sure that these funds traveled in a way that others could see that there's no shenanigans going on, that no one could blame the administrators, Paul, of this service that he's providing to the needy saints in Jerusalem. And so Paul uses this expression, and I'd like to read it. He says, avoiding this, at verse 20, that anyone should blame us in this lavish gift which is administered by us. And then he says, providing honorable things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. And so we can see, as we say, this principle, this teaching, that basically says this: Christians are to avoid the appearance of impropriety. Now, they're to avoid impropriety. It's wrong to steal. It's wrong to shack up. But it is also wrong when we don't take every pain, every step that we can to show that we're honest, to show that what we're doing is above board, to show that what we are doing is on the up and up, all of these terms that we use. And so I'd like for us, and this question was raised, a brother asked the question, just what does that mean? And he said, I don't really know what this means exactly. And so let's explore that a little bit. If you have any comments or something, feel free to do so. But in Matthew 11, I'm going to start here. Listen to what was said about Jesus and John the Baptist. At Matthew 11 at verse 18, for John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. And then Jesus says, but wisdom is justified by her children. So Christ and John the Baptist were falsely accused here. And certainly that can happen to us. But that's not what Paul's principle here is trying to avoid those accusations. Did you notice what he says at verse 20? Avoiding this. See, and so it's incumbent upon us, whatever we do, we're the ones that are to avoid this appearance. Now, we may get falsely accused, and we will. You remember Jesus says, blessed are you when men shall revile you, Matthew 5, persecute you, and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my name's sake. See, happy are ye when they say bad things about you and charge you like they did with Jesus and them. Blessed are ye. Now that's one thing, right? But it's another thing to shack up and then claim, oh, we're not doing anything. Well, it sure looks as if you might be doing something, and that's the issue. See, the Apostle Paul is going to administer a large sum, this lavish gift, see. And so he says what we're going to do, though, is avoid anything to where people could blame us. See, that they might say Paul's doing something with these funds. Look at, that's a lot of money. Well, what did he do? He traveled with very credible men who had good reputations among the churches, that the churches knew these guys here, we can count on these funds getting where they ought to go. See? And so Paul, is covered. And the false accusers can let them run rampant, see? But what he did was not travel around with these funds with no accounting system. See, these men with him, provided honesty, didn't they? Because they provided, we know how much money Corinth took up, because these messengers, these guys traveling with him, we'll learn later, are messengers from the churches, They messengers of the churches, men sent forth for a specific cause. And so these travelers, was his accounting system, was the witnesses to these funds and how they were going to be carried, where they would get to, and all of those things. Providing for honest things in the sight of all men. So let us not have this attitude like I ran up on one time where Brother Hall, a lady, Jeremy will know this story, but a lady and her boyfriend was living together. And the church had issues with it and were, why are y'all staying together? Well, she was claiming he doesn't have anywhere to stay. He's just staying here. We're not doing anything. He sleeps downstairs. I'm upstairs. And then we said, well, but we see y'all coming and going at night, 2, 3 in the morning. Like, are y'all married? No, we're not married. We're just, they giving the appearance that they're married, aren't they? And we tried to point that out. And we were told, in essence, get your mind out of the gutter. Well, then you got to turn over here. Let's go through how Paul handles such a situation. This appearance of impropriety, of dishonesty, of making sure that things are in fact above board. And so we just painstakingly went through that. It was difficult to get that through to them. They didn't really want to get that through to them. And of course, to my knowledge, they're not serving God now, but we were trying to head off what we knew all along, you see. So, any comments to this point about avoiding the appearance? That's the issue. We certainly want to avoid the sin, but we want to avoid the appearance. So shacking up is not only wrong because you might place this other person in a position to sin, and you certainly do, The bed is undefiled. And so if you're in the same house and same room and living quarters and all, that is not smart to be that close to somebody that you're sleeping with, downstairs, upstairs, and all these claims that you're going to try to pawn off on people. What we know is how it looks. See, that's the point. That's what Paul's talking about. See, this principle goes beyond, are y'all sleeping together? This principle is about what it looks like. Avoiding the blame. Avoiding blame, see. They might blame us. They might blame Paul for traveling with that lavish gift. But he had something to fall back on, didn't he? See, he was covered. See, he provided honest things. What were those things? Good, honest men that people had good confidence in, good reputations. And so that way, if somebody did blame them, it fall on deaf ears. It's not credible because people are traveling with these funds. See the pangs he goes through to ensure that what he was doing was honest, providing for honest things. That don't mean they won't call us a thief anyway. See, but what we've done though is taken steps to ensure that those claims, others can see those claims are false. We don't find that credible at all. I mean, we know who's traveling with Titus. That person isn't named. We know the other brother that was sent that had proven himself diligent in all things. And he's with Paul now. And so this caravan here is solid in terms of men of integrity. And we got more than one set of eyeballs on these funds. Says, and brethren were confident with that. And that's what we're talking about, providing for honest things. I don't know what the system is, but we take pains here as we count the funds, as we pay bills. There's a step I think this goes through to make sure, see, that very thing can't happen, that somebody can't misappropriate, misuse the funds, that there's a system in place. You notice a lot of times there's multiple men counting the funds here, and that's just our way. You wouldn't have to, this is pretty open, isn't it? And a man would have to be, there's cameras, a man would have to be pretty bold. So if a person was just counting it, that'd be fine, but we double down on that, don't we? We have multiple men counting it to protect our men, see, and to protect any appearance of impropriety. Romans 12, Paul says, don't render evil for evil. But then he says, but have regard for good things in the sight of all men. And that's another principle that's similar to this one here, that we love honesty as Christians and integrity and uprightness. See, and we want to have a high regard for those things among all men. See, we want them to see we're honest people. We value honesty. Well, then, see, that's what Paul values honesty. He made sure that it looked that way too. See, he didn't place himself in a situation to where people could blame him, because they certainly could now. If he was traveling with these funds, he's going around collecting it. You see, just him. You see, and he's got all of this money traveling with it, see, and he's stopping off, and maybe he needs a drink or some chips or something, but the point is, here's just, and then by the time it gets over here, the question becomes, did it all get there? You see, we know what Corinth gave. We know what Thessalonica gave, see? But when it gets over here to these brethren, and Paul takes it up, and now here's every penny of it, and you go, really? See, his enemies would look at that with one eyebrow up, going, So wait a minute. Where Paul? They start calling, hey, Corinth, how much did you sin? Did y'all get up? Thessalonica, how much did you get up? See, because Noah, see, you set yourself up for failure there. You might could pull it off, but there is an appearance there, isn't it? See, and so that's what we're talking about here. Avoiding this, that anyone should blame us in this lavish gift. Having regard for good things in the sight of all men. 1 Peter 3 says, 1 Peter 2 says, providing honorable things in the sight of all men. Same idea. See, we ought to provide these things. And that way we don't give the as Paul put it, the adversary an occasion to speak reproachfully about God and his people, about Jesus Christ, by our inappropriate behavior. When you provide for honest things, you cut that off at the legs. So you kill any appearance of impropriety. And that's what we're talking about. Any other comments or thoughts before we proceed? Dave?
Off the subject a little bit, Rob, but certainly dealing with spiritual things. You know, this has been many years ago. I just ignorant didn't know this, but you know, when I first really became a Christian and studied the Bible, you know, which will tie into a minute. I mean, it'll tie in with, you know, kind of along the line of what you were saying. Anyway, you know, in translating our Bible, there's not one man that does that. There's a group of men that are highly intelligent men that translate this from one version to the next to prove things honest. And my thought was, well, how do I know this is right? I know it's God's word, but because the translation, well, you know, when you get to reading and seeing who all was involved in doing that, I think that ties in. It removes any doubt from people as much as it can that there's not one man doing the translating on this, right?
It is. It's exactly. They took those kinds of pains to not give any appearance of impropriety. Like, for instance, at verse 13, where it's interpolated, but they add men there, see? And of course, it looks like the smoking gun for people who want to take funds out of the church treasury and support non-Christians. But they put that there, though. See, they could have left it off, and then it'd make a lot more sense just, you know, if you left that word off, the men off at verse 13 of 2 Corinthians chapter 9. But be that as it may, they did that. If you study carefully, they did that throughout the Bible, because if you leave that interpolation off, you could end up also with a misunderstanding of what the text is saying. It works both ways. They were trying, see, to show people we're not trying to add to these holy writs, these holy writings, these inspired words, but what we are trying to do is ensure that we give the correct translation and meaning of this particular phrase. And so since there is what looks like a missing word here, we're going to supply this word, because clearly what he had in mind was this, and they took those kinds of steps. See, and it was to ensure that there was a proper accounting of these words. They were all in agreement, see, on what word should we add here. Well, if you got 40 people going right here, all should right here. And even though it's italicized, it wasn't in the original text. It's just added to help the reader give a proper, in the translating of this Greek statement or this Hebrew text, to help give the proper meaning. It was also to not give an appearance of impropriety in the handling of these holy words. So, Paul continues to talk about, at chapter 9, encouraging Corinth to get up this collection. And so he says now at verse 1, concerning the ministering to the saints, it's superfluous for me to write to you, for I know your willingness, about which I boast to you, to the Macedonians, that Achaia was ready a year ago, and your zeal has stirred up the majority. Yet I've sent the brethren, lest our boasting of you should be in vain in this respect, that, as I said, you may be ready. Lest if some Macedonians come with me and find you unprepared, not to mention you, he says, should be ashamed of this confident boasting. Therefore, I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren to go to you ahead of time and prepare your generous gift beforehand, which you had previously promised, that it may be ready as a matter of generosity and not as a grudging obligation. And so Paul simply reinforces what he's been explaining to them, his motives for sending these men along. Now he's coming. He'll say in this same letter, this will be the third time I'm coming to you. He'll say that a couple of times. So he's on his way, but he sends these men ahead of him to get these funds up. They had promised that they would a year earlier. They had not. And so we see this great act of love on his part and on the part of Titus. See, he had said, and thanks be to God, who put this same earnest care into the heart of Titus for you. We're going to comment on that hopefully here in just a moment, because one of the things that God does to help churches when they do what's right, I believe, is send good men among them. It's to ensure that they have people that care about them. And it may take different forms. You know, here's a little church at Legion Street. Here's a little church at South Tuscaloosa. Here's a little church at Jacksonville. Here's a little church at Walnut Grove. But what the Lord did is, through this congregation here, is sent men for years. We all went to help these little works. We cared for them. We got to know them. We ate with them. We worshiped with them. We supported their meetings. We broke bread with them. See, good little works. And so, see, and thanks be to God who put this same earnest care for you into the hearts of Titus, you see. And that we're blessed when we have that. And Brother Hall and them came our way when we lost a good soldier in Brother Sutton. And then we're all wondering, what in the world are we going to do? Now, we got capable men here. We could run 100 years probably. We got enough men here capable of doing stuff. But we all grateful, see, that we can see an earnest care for us in the heart of this man as well. See, now Brother Sutton battled with us a big part of his whole life since the 60s. You see, that's what we're talking about here, when you got people who really care about you. And they're not seeking what's yours, but they seeking you. They trying to help you. And so here, he's showing them, look, I'm not trying to put any undue pressure on you by sending these men through. He says that. I don't mean that others should be eased and you burdened and all those things. This is about, I need y'all to get this contribution up, and I need you to do so with the proper attitude. Now, notice with me, that's really what this is about. Oftentimes, we emphasize the fact that he sends them to get the money up. He's sending them ahead. Titus and them is going to go in there and say, look, when you give, here's how you give. Don't begrudge it. See, yes, he's going to get the money up. See, he wants this money done ahead of time so that they aren't embarrassed after all the boasting that he had done, see. So he sends this group ahead to get it up, he says, ahead of time. Because we all know, I believe, this principle, this temptation that the devil places upon us. If somebody asks us nicely to do something, or come in last minute and call out all of our responsibilities, the devil can tempt us to resent that. We kind of begrudge it. So this team is sent ahead of time, see, to put out all of them fires. That's exactly what he says. Notice carefully with me. He says at verse 5, therefore I thought it necessary to exhort the brethren to go to you ahead of time, watch this now, and prepare your generous gift beforehand, which you had promised. Now look, they not only said we're going to give, they said we're going to give a bunch. See, we really going to give. They was excited about it. Paul says, it's unnecessary for me to write to you about giving. That is unnecessary. That's how he opens, right? Now, concerning the ministering to the saints, it's superfluous for me to write to you. It's overkill. Really, it's more than enough that I'm writing to you, because really, you don't really have a problem in this area. I know your willingness to give. And so here, though, he identifies that they were going to give a generous gift. And so he starts talking about generosity, but he sent these men ahead of time to emphasize you need to give with generosity. See, why hadn't these funds been gotten up? After a year's time, and Brother Hall, I answered too quickly. You had, as a good point, you had asked me out here about were they even taking up a collection. Well, if you go back when I was talking on 1 Corinthians 16, I brought that up. Jeremy reminded me of it, I think, but I remember too that I raised that question too. But when you read what's going on here, it makes you wonder, were they even taking up funds at this point? They very well might have been, but when you just take the whole context and the question of why wasn't the funds ready? Like if you were taking up funds, like here now, we got funds. And if somebody come by, we could give it right now today if we wanted to. And if they were taking up a collection, here a year's gone by, and Paul is saying, I'm going to send Titus up in here to prepare your gift beforehand. This language, it kind of defies to me the way the contribution actually works. If there's funds going in every first day of the week, see, and the question becomes, well, what's to get up? What is it he's having to do besides write the check, you see, or here or whatever, hand this bag of coins over, whatever they were. Their monetary system called for. Brother White.
Well, I have a question about 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2, and the collection for the needy saints. I see that as two separate things. I mean, I know that we are to lay by each first day of the week, but this is a special need that came up. Would the church at Corinth not be laying by in store each first day of the week, and this would be something that they would be laying aside in addition to their normal contribution?
Yeah, I think you and I are on the same page on that. I think when I taught that, it raised a question or two in the audience. It's the idea of earmarking funds. And like at Antioch, when the Agabus and them comes down, there's a famine among the brethren throughout the world, and the brethren at Judea was going to be affected, and the text says this: and the disciples determined to send relief to the brethren at Judea, and this they did and sent it by the hands of Barnabas and Saul, see, and laid it at the feet of the elders. So, yes, Gerald, I do believe there is certainly a difference, like what we just did for the saints at Zimbabwe. Is we determined to send, disciples determined to send funds. And so we took up funds just among ourselves and sent it and laid the funds at the feet of Tenson there to administer those foods and things to the needy saints there. But be that as it may, that's a good point. And I actually think we see that alike. Any other comments or thoughts, Brother White?
I would ask, can we lay by the treasury and earmark funds in the treasury to send for a specific?
Oh, yes. I think that's what they did here. Yeah, I think that's what they did here, is that they made a promise. See, they would still be supporting whoever is preaching among them. They'd still be keeping their lights on. These funds are taken up. 1 Corinthians 16 tells us how to raise funds, doesn't it, to meet the church's needs. We see these needs laid out. Paul says, I robbed other churches to do you service. So he took funds, not from Corinth, but he took funds from Philippi, looks like Thessalonica, other places, while he was working at Corinth. And so there's this ongoing use of funds to support preachers, which is God, like Paul pointed out, the Lord commanded that those who preach the gospel should live of the gospel, be supported of the gospel. And so those funds would be taken out of this treasury, but there would also be funds earmarked for other purposes, like, for instance, the needy saints, see? And so here, so yes, Gerald, I believe that churches have authority to earmark funds out of the common fund for the authorized scriptural uses of those funds, without question. Any other comments or anything along those lines? All right, and so you can see he says here, we're going to send them ahead, verse 5, to prepare your generous gift, which you had previously promised. But look, he says, that it may be ready as a matter of generosity and not as a grudge and obligation. See, I'm sending them to you. Yes, we want to get the funds up, but I also want you to give the right way, because it won't do you any good otherwise. Though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor and have not charity, it profits me nothing. And if you begrudge your giving, if you're stingy, yeah, you're going to give, but you're going to have to rip it out of your pockets, see? Or you're going to feel like somebody's trying to make you do something, this grudging obligation, then you're going to have problems with the Lord, see? And all the principles show that type giving just won't make it. There's no credit for these kind of these givings of ill repute type things. That we have to give right. And so this team is sent in there to ensure that that happens. See, not merely to get up what they had promised, but they were to go in there, if I'm reading this correctly, see, when he says, I thought it necessary to exhort them to go in ahead of time, that it may be ready as a matter of generosity and not as a grudging obligation. See? So if we don't send them in there there's this temptation, see, when we show up here and the Macedonians are here and this money isn't up and now we unprepared. And so, boy, now this thing ain't going to go over as smoothly. The devil will take advantage of people in them kind of situations. We all know that feeling of if somebody don't ask us nicely. See, or Paul shows up and he's going, a year ago? I mean, the funds aren't already up by now? See, and then so now you're going to give it, but how are you going to give it? You know, lovingly and generously. He shows up here on the doorstep going, where's the money? You see. And so I believe that's what he's talking about, trying to head off the devil's devices and temptations of brethren in their giving in the first place. These are things we have to battle. And to not give what you said you were going to give, I believe is all written all over this dialogue. Listen and see if you can identify it with me. So he says, I want this to be ready, verse 5, as a matter of generosity and not as a grudging obligation. He says, but this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. He who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So, watch what he says, let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly. See, he's talking about, I'm sending these men in here to make sure you don't begrudge this giving, because God loves a cheerful giver. That, and I want you to know this too, if you hold back, that there's a principle in place that he who sows sparingly will reap sparingly. He who sows, see, now they promised a generous gift. And this is about generosity here. He who sows sparingly will reap sparingly. But he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So then he says, see, so let each one give as he purposes. Now, had they been giving, you see, had they been giving all along, and he's just restating here, make sure that you give like this. See, this advanced team is sent in to prepare it beforehand, and then he says, so let each one give. And so here's this giving that is going to happen. See, when they get this letter, they'd have these inspired instructions. See, these men are coming through. I'm going to send them beforehand to get these funds up. I'm coming. And so that is one of the spots where you wonder, were they giving up until this point? There's other, to me, throughout this text that makes me wonder whether or not they are or not. But be that as it may, any comments or thoughts on that before we proceed? Yes.
But back up there in verse 2, the end of verse 2, he said, and your zeal hath provoked very many. That the point that you're making, if this thing didn't look like what it should look like, I mean, look how bad that makes them look. Mm-hmm. Because, initially that's what it seems that their zeal, what Paul's been saying about them all along, is why others were intending to give the way that they did. Mm-hmm. And if you turn around and then it don't appear like it did at the beginning, how bad that would look,
Man, if a Roman comes through, that'd be one thing. But if a Macedonian come through, here's brethren who were in a deep poverty, right? And some of these brethren, and of course, if you read in Acts 16, 17, 18, you'll see that there were Macedonians traveling with him during this time. And so he says, some might come with me. And some of these brethren, poor brethren, show up here, and the rich brethren, the generous brethren, got plenty. They ain't got their funds up. The very people, like Jeremy's pointing out, that motivated them to give in the first place. When Paul talked about their willingness to give, and they had promised a generous gift. And so these poor people dug deep, got up a contribution larger than Paul and them suspected and expected. And then, so Paul is using this, isn't he, to really motivate these brethren. See, the diligence of the Macedonians is obviously in play here. See, I'm using the diligence of others. I speak not by commandment, but I'm testing the sincerity of your love by the diligence of others. Yes, sir.
It's interesting that it used the Corinthians to motivate the Macedonians, and that is using the Macedonians to motivate the Corinthians.
Exactly. Good point. Excellent point. So there is it's incumbent upon them, isn't it, to follow through on this and to give properly and to be generous in their giving. The Bible has a lot to say, and I know we got just a few more minutes here, but let me read here just a moment about the generosity of brethren. Jesus says, "Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you." See, this is that. What Paul is saying over here, he who sows sparingly. See, that's the measure you. What measure you use? Sparingly? You just you just pull some change out here on Sunday and give? No, without purpose, without forethought. See, what measure you use? See, sparingly or bountifully? Is that your standard? Is that your measure when you give? See, and so Jesus spoke on that. See, give, and it'll be given to you. Good measure. But then he says, the psalmist said this: "Blessed is he who considers the poor. The Lord will deliver him in time of trouble. The Lord will preserve him and keep him alive, and he will be blessed on the earth." There's a reason I'm reading this. "The Lord will strengthen him on his bed of illness. You will sustain him on his sick bed. You will not deliver him to the will of his enemies." Can you see what generosity and those who look on the poor, what God, the psalmist, said God will do for us, for those who considers the poor? He'll sustain him on his sick bed. The Lord will strengthen him on his bed of illness. It's a lot in play, isn't it? As terms of our generosity and considering of the poor. Thank y'all for your good comments and good points and good thoughts.